The summit's second day began with arguments and ended with fear. Princess Valarat Sin stood at the center of the Grand Assembly Hall and laid out the Elori Dominion's demands with the calm precision of someone who had already decided she would get what she wanted. 3 contested hyperspace corridors, each one a vital route connecting dozens of systems, would fall under exclusive Elori control. In return, the Dominion would offer reduced transit fees to Union members. She called it a partnership. Everyone in the room knew it was a leash. The smaller delegations pushed back. The Solari ambassador, a stocky reptilian diplomat with scarred ridges along his jaw, argued that giving one species control over the corridors would cripple free trade for a generation. The Fenith delegation, a group of soft-spoken amphibians who rarely raised their voices, issued a formal objection. Even the Dravi, who usually stayed neutral in everything, expressed concern. Valara handled them all with ease. She had data, projections, economic models, and behind every polished word was the unspoken truth that the Elori had the largest fleet in the Union. She never made threats. She did not need to. The fleet spoke for itself. Cole watched none of this from the assembly hall. He was not allowed inside during formal sessions. But he watched everything from the service corridors that ran behind the chamber walls, where maintenance workers and supply staff moved unseen. He stood near a ventilation grate that opened into the hall and listened to every word. He had been doing this since the summit began. Between sessions he walked the ship. Not randomly, he followed patterns. He counted guard rotations and timed their intervals. He noted which communication relays were active and which ones carried encrypted traffic. He studied how each delegation moved through the ship, where they gathered in private, and who talked to whom when they thought no one was watching. Nate caught him one evening, standing in a corridor near the Elori quarters, pretending to check a supply manifest on his datapad. "You've been doing this for 3 days, Nate said, keeping his voice low. "Don't tell me you're just checking inventory." "I'm checking inventory," Cole said without looking up. "You're a terrible liar, Cole." Cole finally met his eyes. There was something in his expression that Nate had never seen before. It was not fear, it was patience. The deep, steady patience of someone waiting for a very specific moment. "Trust me," Cole said. "Please." Nate held his gaze for a long time, then let out a breath. "But if you get thrown out an airlock, I'm not writing your eulogy." On the third morning, the summit was interrupted. A long-range sensor officer on the bridge detected a massive object approaching from deep space. It was not on any known trajectory. It was not broadcasting any identification signal. It was simply there, moving toward the starward crest at a speed that should not have been possible for something its size. When the object's profile was finally resolved on the main display, the bridge crew went silent. It was a Vorath dreadnought. The Vorath were known across the galaxy by many names: the Obsidian Lords, the Unchained, the Dark Giants. They were an ancient race, older than most civilizations currently sitting in the assembly hall. Each Vorath stood close to 12 feet tall, with skin that looked like polished black stone and eyes that burned a deep, steady amber. They did not join alliances. They did not sign treaties. They did not kneel before anyone, and they had not attended a Union summit in over 100 years. Their arrival changed everything. The dreadnought docked with the starward crest through an extended docking arm that had to be specially reinforced to handle the ship's mass. When the airlock opened, 4 Vorath warriors stepped through first. They wore no armor and carried no visible weapons, but every person in the corridor instinctively stepped back. The warriors moved with a slow, heavy grace, like mountains that had learned to walk. Behind them came Grand Warden Drethak. He was the oldest living Vorath. No one knew his exact age, but the records suggested he had been leading his people for at least 3,000 years. He was enormous, even by Vorath standards. His obsidian skin, carved with deep lines and ancient markings that glowed faintly in the ship's light. His amber eyes were calm and heavy with the weight of ages. He entered the Grand Assembly Hall without ceremony. He did not bow. He did not greet the delegates. He stood at the center of the chamber and waited until the room fell silent on its own. Then he spoke. His voice was deep and slow, like stones grinding together in the dark. He said that the Vorath had detected something in deep space, a signal, older than the Vorath themselves. It had been dormant for millennia, buried in a region of space known as the Dead Reach, and now it had begun to wake up. He called it the Hollow Signal. He said that ships on the outer rim had already begun to vanish, not destroyed, not disabled, simply gone, erased from existence, as if they had never been. The signal was growing stronger, and if it was not stopped, it would reach populated systems within weeks. He asked the Union for a joint response. Delegates shouted over each other, demanding proof, questioning the Vorath's motives, accusing them of trying to manipulate the summit. In the middle of it all, Valara stood and raised her hand for silence. The Aelori Dominion will lead this response, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. We have the ships, the resources, and the command structure. We will handle this. Drethak turned his massive head and looked at her. He stared for a long time, his amber eyes unblinking. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then painful. We did not come to follow children who play at thrones, he said. Valara's composure cracked for just a moment. A flash of anger crossed her face before she buried it behind a mask of cold diplomacy. The summit dissolved into chaos. Delegations broke into factions. Arguments spilled out of the assembly hall and into the corridors. No one could agree on who should lead, who should contribute, or even whether the Vorath were telling the truth. And somewhere in the lower decks, Cole Ashby stood alone in a darkened storage room, staring at a small device embedded in his wrist. It was pulsing faintly. It had been pulsing since the moment Drethak mentioned the hollow signal. Cole closed his eyes and pressed his palm flat against the cold wall of the ship. He knew what the signal was. Cole found Lena in her cabin at 0300 hours, when the ship's corridors were empty and the lights had dimmed to their night cycle. He did not knock. He entered a code on the door panel that Lena had never given him, and the door slid open. She was already awake, sitting at her terminal with a cup of cold coffee beside her. She did not look surprised to see him. She had been expecting this visit for 2 days. It's time, Cole said. Lena turned in her chair and studied him. You understand what happens if you come out of the shadows. Every cover identity you've built over the last 5 years burns. Every alias, every placement, every safe house contact, all of it, gone. I know. And you still want to do this. Cole leaned against the doorframe. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something heavy. 3 ships vanished yesterday on the outer rim. A Fenith cargo hauler, a Dravai survey vessel, and an Aelori patrol cruiser. 1,400 people, Lena. Gone. Not dead. Gone. No wreckage. No signal. Nothing. Lena said nothing. If that signal reaches populated space, Cole continued, there won't be anyone left to keep covers for. She held his gaze for a long time. Then she reached under her desk and pulled out a small case. Inside was a data interface module, military grade, with markings that did not match any publicly known human technology. I've been carrying this since we boarded, she said. Command sent it with me in case you made this call. She handed it to him. You're sure about this? No, Cole said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. He took the module and left without another word. 20 minutes later, Cole stood in a maintenance junction on Deck 14. He opened an access panel and connected the data interface module to a hidden partition in the ship's computer system. The partition was buried deep, layered beneath standard security protocols and accessible only through a clearance code that officially did not exist. Cole entered the code. The system responded. What appeared on the screen was not supply manifests or crew rosters. It was deep space telemetry data, the kind that required military-grade sensor arrays and years of analysis to compile. It showed the dead reach in detail that no Union database contained. Star positions, gravitational anomalies, radiation fields, and at the center of it all, a structure. The structure was enormous. It sat in a pocket of folded space, hidden from conventional sensors by layers of spatial distortion that bent light and energy around it like water flowing around a stone. It was not a ship. It was not a station. It was a weapon. Ancient, automated, and built by a civilization that had existed and vanished long before the Vorath first opened their eyes. Cole stared at the image. He had seen this structure once before, 5 years ago, through the cockpit window of a burning shuttle, as his team died around him. He downloaded the data onto a portable drive and sealed the partition behind him. The next morning, Cole requested a private meeting with Grand Warden Drethek. The request went through Lena, who routed it through a diplomatic back channel that bypassed the normal Union protocols. Drethek agreed, which surprised everyone involved. The Vorath did not take meetings with trainees. They met in a small conference room on the upper deck. The room had been designed for standard-sized species, so Drethek had to lower his head to enter through the doorway and sat on the floor rather than attempt one of the chairs. Even sitting, he was taller than Cole standing. 2 Vorath warriors stood outside the door. Inside, it was just the 2 of them. Cole placed the portable drive on the floor between them and activated a holographic display. The image of the weapon filled the room with pale blue light. "This is the source of your hollow signal," Cole said. Drethek studied the image. His amber eyes moved slowly across every detail. "Where did you get this?" "I was there," Cole said. 5 years ago, a covert human unit was sent into the dead reach to investigate energy readings that did not match any known source. There were 8 of us. We found the outer perimeter of this structure and attempted to approach. He paused. The room was very quiet. The defenses activated. They were beyond anything we had ever encountered. Our ships were torn apart in seconds. My team was killed. All of them. I survived because my shuttle was thrown clear by a spatial distortion wave. I drifted for 11 days before a salvage crew found me. Drethek's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. And the data? Before the defenses hit us, our sensors recorded everything. The weapon's layout, its energy signature, the pattern of its defenses. I couldn't transmit the data because our communications were destroyed. So I had it encoded into a neural implant in my spine. I've been carrying it for 5 years. Drethek was silent for a long time. The holographic image hummed softly between them. "You hid this," Drethek said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Why?" Cole looked up at the ancient giant. "Because no one in this galaxy takes a human seriously until they have no other choice. If I had brought this data forward 5 years ago, it would have been taken from me, analyzed by species who would not share their findings, and buried in some committee's classified archive. The weapon would still be out there, and no one would have done anything about it. And now people are disappearing. Now the signal is active. Now everyone is scared." Cole's voice was steady. "Now they have no other choice." Drethek studied the human sitting before him. Cole was small by any galactic standard. He had no armor, no weapons, no fleet at his back. He was sitting on the floor of a conference room that was too small for the meeting it held, presenting data that could change the course of the galaxy, and he was doing it with the calm of someone who had already accepted every possible outcome. The Grand Warden had lived for 3,000 years. He had watched empires rise and crumble. He had seen species declare themselves eternal and then vanish within a century. In all that time, very few beings had ever truly surprised him. "You may be the first of your kind that I do not find disappointing," Drethak said. "Almost. Give me time," he said. "I might still disappoint you." Drethak let out a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell with the Vorath. "I doubt that," he said. "Tell me your plan, Cole Ashby." And Cole did. The news spread through the starward crest like fire. A human trainee had been meeting privately with the Grand Warden of the Vorath. Not a diplomat, not an admiral. A trainee from the logistics division. The same man who had been pushing supply carts through corridors 3 days ago had sat across from the oldest living being in the galaxy and presented intelligence that no one else had. The reactions were predictable. The smaller delegations were confused. The Dravi were intrigued. The Fenith were cautiously hopeful. Princess Valarat Sin was furious. She called an emergency session of the assembly and demanded that Cole be brought before the delegates to explain himself. The request was granted. Cole walked into the Grand Assembly Hall for the first time since boarding the ship, still wearing his plain gray trainee uniform, and stood at the center of the chamber, where heads of state and royal bloodlines usually stood. Her silver skin caught the light, and her violet eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "By what authority," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, "does a human trainee conduct private meetings with a foreign power during an active Union summit? By what authority do you go behind the backs of every delegation in this room?" Cole stood still. He let the question hang in the air for a moment before he answered. "I don't need your authority," he said. His voice was not loud, but the hall's acoustics carried it to every seat. "I need your hyperspace lanes." The hall stirred. Valara's eyes narrowed. "You need our hyperspace lanes," she repeated slowly, as if tasting something bitter. "The weapon in the dead reach is activating. The only way to reach it in time is through the corridors your Dominion controls. Without access, any strike team would take weeks to arrive. By then, the signal will have reached 3 populated sectors." Cole paused. "You can give access willingly. Or?" Valara's voice was ice. Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. He held it up between 2 fingers so the entire hall could see it. "Or I can show this assembly the full record of the Alori surveillance network that your Dominion has been running inside Union communications for the past 6 years. The hall went completely silent. Not the quiet of attention, the silence of shock. Valara's composure broke. It was brief, just a flicker, but everyone saw it. Her aide leaned forward and whispered something urgent in her ear. She did not respond. Her eyes were locked on the data chip in Cole's hand. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "I spent 5 years embedded in the lowest levels of Union infrastructure. I had access to communication relays, maintenance logs, and system diagnostics that your surveillance team never thought to encrypt, because they assumed no one at my level would ever look. I found the network 8 months ago. I mapped every node, every relay, every piece of data your people have intercepted." He lowered the chip. "I am not bluffing." The Solari ambassador leaned forward in his seat. The Fenith delegation exchanged looks. Even the Dravi, who prided themselves on neutrality, were watching with open interest. Valara stood very still for a long time. The entire hall waited. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Full access to corridors 7, 12, and 19 for the duration of the mission. Alori ships contribute to the strike force under joint command. In return, This data chip stays with me, and the contents are never made public. And if I refuse, then the Assembly sees everything, and the Alori Dominion spends the next decade explaining why it was spying on its own allies, while people were vanishing in the dead reach. The silence stretched. Valara's jaw tightened. Her hands, hidden beneath the folds of her formal robes, were clenched into fists. "Agreed," she said through her teeth. Cole nodded once and put the chip back in his pocket. From the back of the hall, Nate Greer stood with his arms crossed and his mouth slightly open. He shook his head slowly and whispered to himself, "You absolute madman." Within hours, the summit transformed. What had been a stalled negotiation became a war council. Cole led the mission briefing in a tactical room that had been cleared for the purpose. Lena Pratt handled communications and logistics, coordinating between the different species with a quiet efficiency that impressed even the Vorath. 3 Vorath heavy cruisers, each one crewed by warriors who had been fighting since before most species in the room had discovered space travel. 2 Alori fast attack frigates, grudgingly provided by Valaris Command. A Solari support vessel with advanced medical facilities, and 1 human ship, the Farpoint, a small and aging scout vessel that Nate had personally overhauled in the engineering bay. "She's not pretty," Nate said, patting the hull of the Farpoint, "but she'll hold." Cole looked at him. "You don't have to come." "Yeah, I do," Nate said simply. "Someone has to keep the engines running when everything goes wrong. And everything is going to go wrong." Cole did not argue. He knew Nate was right on both counts. The night before departure, Cole stood alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. The dead reach was out there, somewhere, invisible to the eye, a wound in the fabric of space, where something ancient and terrible was waking up. Footsteps behind him, heavy, slow. The deck vibrated slightly with each one. Drethak stood beside him. Even in the large observation deck, the Grand Warden's presence seemed to fill the room. He looked out at the same stars and said nothing for a long time. "The Vorath have a saying," Drethak finally said. "The mountain does not bow to the wind, but it remembers the river that carved it." Cole looked up at him. Drethak placed a massive hand on Cole's shoulder. The weight of it was enormous, but the touch was careful, almost gentle. "You are the river, Cole Ashby. The mountain will remember you." Cole stood beneath the hand of the ancient giant and felt, for the first time in 5 years, that the weight he carried was not his alone. Tomorrow they would fly into the dark. Tonight the stars were quiet, and that was enough. The dead reach was worse than Cole remembered. The strike team entered the region through Hyperspace Corridor 12, and the moment they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, reality itself seemed to bend. The stars outside the viewports flickered and stretched like reflections on disturbed water. Gravity shifted without warning. Instruments that had worked perfectly minutes ago began to give readings that made no sense. Cole sat in the cockpit of the Farpoint, beside Nate, who was already swearing at 3 different warning lights on his console. "The spatial distortions are stronger than the last data suggested," Lena's voice came through from the communication station behind them. "The Vorath cruisers are adjusting formation. The Alori frigates are having trouble with their navigation systems." "Tell them to follow the Farpoint," Cole said. "I know the way." The data from his neural implant fed directly into the navigation computer, tracing a path through the distortions that no sensor could have found on its own. It was the same path his original team had taken 5 years ago, mapped in the final minutes before everything fell apart. The journey took 14 hours. They lost the first ship at hour 3. An Alori frigate strayed too far from the formation when a distortion wave hit. The wave twisted the space around the ship like a hand wringing out a cloth. The frigate crumpled, then vanished. No explosion, no debris, just gone. 86 crew. Cole's hands tightened on the controls, but he did not stop. At hour 7, the ancient defenses activated. Beams of energy that burned white-hot lanced out from structures hidden in the folded space around them. A Vorath cruiser took a direct hit. Its hull, thick enough to withstand a planetary bombardment, cracked open like an eggshell. The cruiser broke apart in silence. In the dead reach, there was no sound. Ships died quietly here. Nate rerouted power from every non-essential system on the farpoint to keep the shields running. His hands moved across the console so fast they blurred. "We can't take another hit like that," he said. "We won't have to," Cole said. "We're almost through." He was right. At hour 14, the defenses thinned, and the strike team emerged into a pocket of calm space at the center of the dead reach. And there it was. The weapon. It hung in the void like a cathedral built by gods who had no use for mercy. It was miles across, its surface covered in patterns that shifted and moved like living things. Energy pulsed through it in waves, each pulse stronger than the last. At its center, a core of light burned so bright that the viewports automatically dimmed to protect the crew's eyes. The hollow signal was coming from that core, and it was almost fully charged. "If that thing fires," Lena said, reading the energy output on her screen, "the wave will reach 3 galactic sectors. Every ship, every station, every inhabited world in its path will be erased." "How long?" Cole asked. 40 minutes, maybe less." Cole unbuckled his harness and stood up. Nate looked at him and immediately understood. "No," Nate said. "No, Cole. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Cole's voice was steady. "The shutdown mechanism requires a direct neural interface with the core. My implant is the only compatible device in this strike team. It was built from the same technology. That's why I survived the first time. That's why Command put the data in my spine instead of on a drive. They knew this might be necessary." "The energy feedback will destroy the implant," Lena said from behind them. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were shaking. "It could cause permanent neurological damage. It could kill you." "It could," Cole agreed. "But if I don't do it, that weapon fires in 40 minutes, and a few billion people stop existing." Nate grabbed his arm. "Cole, please." Cole looked at his friend, the only real friend he had made in 5 years of hiding in plain sight. 5 years of being no one, of carrying a weight that would have broken most people. Nate, who had never asked for explanations, who had simply stood beside him because that was what loyalty looked like. "I didn't survive the dead reach the first time just to watch it win the second," Cole said quietly. He pulled his arm free and walked to the airlock. The core chamber was a cathedral of light and energy. Cole floated through it in a pressure suit, pulled toward the center by a gravity that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls around him hummed with a frequency that he felt in his teeth, in his bones, in the base of his skull where the neural implants sat. He reached the interface point. It was a structure of crystalline material, warm to the touch even through his gloves. He placed both hands on it and activated the implant. The pain was immediate and total. Energy flooded through him like a river of fire. The ancient system recognized the implant and opened a connection, and suddenly, Cole was inside the weapon's mind. It was vast and cold and mechanical, a machine that had been waiting in the dark for longer than any living species could comprehend. Programmed to do one thing, and one thing only: destroy. Cole fought it. He pushed back against the weapon's programming with everything he had. His body convulsed. Blood ran from his nose and ears. The implant in his spine burned like a white-hot wire. Warning signals fired in every nerve, telling him to let go, to stop, to save himself. He did not stop. He found the shutdown sequence buried deep in the weapon's architecture. hidden beneath layers of code written in a language that no living being could read. But the implant could read it. The implant had been built from fragments of this same technology, reverse-engineered by human scientists who did not fully understand what they had created. Cole activated the shutdown. The weapon resisted. The energy output surged. For 10 terrible seconds, Cole existed at the boundary between human will and a machine older than civilization. Then silence. The light in the core dimmed. The humming stopped. The energy waves that had been pulsing outward from the weapon slowed, flickered, and died. The hollow signal faded like a heartbeat going still. The weapon went dark. In the far point, Nate watched his sensors and held his breath until the readings confirmed it. The weapon was offline. The signal was dead. He slumped forward in his chair and pressed his forehead against the console. "He did it," Nate whispered. "The stubborn fool did it." They found Cole floating in the core chamber, unconscious, his suit scorched, and his body limp. Nate went in personally to pull him out, dragging him through zero gravity with hands that would not stop shaking. Cole's eyes opened briefly as they brought him back aboard the Farpoint. His voice was barely a whisper. "Did it work?" Nate gripped his hand so hard it hurt. "Yeah," he said, "it worked." Cole closed his eyes and did not open them again for a long time. The strike team limped back to the starward crest. The surviving ships were battered, burned, and barely functional. When they docked, the entire assembly was waiting in the main hangar bay. Word of what had happened in the Dead Reach had already reached the summit through Lena's communications. The airlock opened. The Vorath warriors came out first, wounded and silent. The Aelori crew followed, their usual pride replaced by something quieter. The Solari medics walked beside hovering stretchers, carrying the injured. Then Nate and Lena came through, carrying Cole between them on a stretcher. He was conscious now, but barely. His face was pale. His eyes were half open. The neural implant in his spine was burned out, and the doctor said the damage might be permanent. The hall fell silent as they carried him through. Grand Warden Drethak stepped forward from among the Vorath delegation. He looked down at Cole Ashby, this small broken human who had walked into the fire that no one else would enter, who had carried the weight of a secret for 5 years, because he knew that no one would listen until they had no other choice, who had been dismissed as a trainee, ignored as a species, and treated as something less than what he was. Drethak looked at him for a long time. Then the oldest living being in the galaxy, the leader of the Dark Giants, the Grand Warden of the Vorath, who had not knelt before any power in over 10,000 years, slowly lowered himself to one knee. The sound of it echoed through the silent hall like thunder. Behind him, his warriors knelt. Every Vorath in the chamber, one by one, placed their massive frames on one knee and bowed their heads before the human on the stretcher. No one moved. No one spoke. No one breathed. Princess Valarat Sin watched from the front of the Aelori delegation. Her face was still, unreadable. She looked at Cole, then at the kneeling giants, then at the floor. Something shifted behind her eyes. Something old and proud cracked. Just a little. Just enough. She stepped forward. She did not kneel, but she lowered her head in a slow, deliberate bow. In Aelori culture, this gesture was reserved only for those considered true equals. She had never offered it to a human before. No Aelori ever had. Cole, lying on the stretcher, looked up at the kneeling giants and the bowing princess through half-closed eyes. A faint, tired smile crossed his face. Then his eyes closed, and he let the exhaustion take him. Nate stood beside the stretcher and said nothing. He just placed his hand on Cole's shoulder and kept it there. The hall remained silent for a long time. They had called him a trainee, They had called his species lesser, unremarkable, not worth a second look. But when the dark came, and the oldest powers in the galaxy had no answers, it was a human who walked into the fire. Not because he was the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful, but because someone had to and he was willing. That was the thing about humans that the galaxy had never understood, and was only now beginning to learn. They did not need to be the biggest. They did not need to be the oldest. They did not need permission or authority or a throne. They just needed a reason. And when they found one, even the dark giants knelt. The Starward Crest was the largest ship Cole Ashby had ever set foot on. It stretched nearly 2 miles from bow to stern, its corridors wide enough to fit species of every shape and size. Hundreds of alien delegates had gathered aboard for the Galactic Union's diplomatic summit, and the air buzzed with tension, ambition, and the quiet hum of 1,000 competing agendas. Cole did not belong among any of them. He was a trainee, the lowest rank a human could hold aboard a Union vessel. His job was to haul supply crates from the cargo bays to the upper decks, restock cleaning stations, and stay out of everyone's way. He wore a plain gray uniform with no insignia, no rank badge, and no name visible unless someone bothered to look closely at the small tag stitched above his chest pocket. Nobody ever did. Humans were new to the Galactic Union. They had been admitted only 11 years ago, and most species still treated them like guests who had overstayed their welcome. Tolerated, but never respected. The general opinion among the older civilizations was that humans were loud, short-lived, and unremarkable. Good enough for labor, not much else. Cole had heard it all before. He kept his head down, did his work, and said nothing. His only real friend on the ship was Nate Greer, a fellow human who worked in the engineering division 2 decks below. Nate was loud where Cole was quiet, blunt where Cole was careful. He had a talent for fixing things that were not supposed to be fixable, and an even greater talent for saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time. But he was loyal to the bone, and in a place like the Starward Crest, that mattered more than anything. The summit officially began on the 3rd day after Cole's arrival. Delegates from over 40 species filled the Grand Assembly Hall, a massive circular chamber with tiered seating and a ceiling made of transparent alloy that showed the stars outside. Cole was not in the hall. He was in the corridor behind it, pushing a hover cart loaded with bottled refreshments for the Aelori delegation. The Aelori were one of the most powerful species in the Union. They controlled a network of hyperspace corridors that connected half the galaxy, and they never let anyone forget it. Their delegation was led by Princess Valarat Sin, the heir to the Aelori Dominion. She was tall, with pale silver skin and deep violet eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. Her movements were graceful and precise, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Cole was turning a corner near the reception area when the hovercart's stabilizer glitched. The cart jerked sideways and clipped the edge of a decorative pillar. 2 bottles tumbled off and rolled across the polished floor, coming to a stop right at Princess Valara's feet. The hallway went quiet. Cole dropped to one knee and picked up the bottles quickly. He kept his eyes low. "I apologize," he said. "The cart malfunctioned." Valara looked down at him, the way someone might look at an insect that had landed on their meal. She turned to one of her aides and asked, "What is this?" The aide checked a small device on his wrist. "A human, Your Highness. Trainee class. Logistics division." Valara let out a soft laugh. It was not cruel exactly, but it was careless, which was worse. "Even their best would bore me," she said, loud enough for the nearby delegates to hear. "A trainee is not worth a second look." A few of the alien delegates nearby smiled. One of them, a tall insectoid ambassador, clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his kind. He placed the bottles back on the cart, straightened up, and walked away without looking back. He found Nate in the lower deck mess hall an hour later. Nate was eating something that the ship's food processors claimed was a sandwich, though it looked more like a gray sponge pressed between two slices of defeat. "I heard what happened," Nate said, not looking up from his tray. Cole sat down across from him. "Word travels fast. This ship has 8,000 people on it and nothing to do but gossip." Nate finally looked up. His expression was hard. "Why didn't you say something? She humiliated you in front of half the summit." "She didn't humiliate me," Cole said quietly. "She dismissed me. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Cole picked up a cup of water and drank slowly. "The time isn't now, Nate." Nate stared at him. "One day, you're going to have to explain what you're waiting for." Cole did not answer. 3 decks above them, in a small private cabin with no official listing on the ship's manifest, a woman named Lena Pratt sat in front of a secure terminal. She was human, mid-30s, with short dark hair, and the kind of face that was easy to forget, which was exactly the point. Officially, she was listed as a civilian consultant attached to the Human Trade Office. Unofficially, she was something else entirely. She opened an encrypted channel and transmitted a short message. "Asset is in position. Cover remains intact. No indicators of compromise." A reply came back within seconds. It was only 2 words. "Hold steady." Lena closed the channel and pulled up a classified personnel file. The photo on the file showed Cole Ashby. Beneath his name, in small red letters, was a designation that did not exist in any public military database. Blackline Operative. Tier 0. Lena stared at the photo for a long moment. The man in the image looked exactly like the quiet trainee, pushing a hovercart through the hallways of the Starward Crest. Same calm eyes, same unremarkable posture, same face that no one would ever remember in a crowd. That was the whole point. She closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Somewhere above her, the summit was already beginning to fracture. The Aelori were pushing hard, the smaller species were getting desperate, and a long-range sensor array had just picked up something moving toward them from deep space. Something big. Lena did not know what was coming, but she had a feeling that before this summit was over, the galaxy was going to learn something about humans that it had never bothered to find out. She turned off the terminal and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the ship around her. The game had not even started yet.